Yeah, so I'm Nicola Brown. I have the role of Head of Abertay Online Programmes, and I'm also a PhD student. And my area is looking into the sense of belonging with our online postgraduate students. And I think what's interesting is that the students that we have at Abertay are wholly asynchronous students, so there's no planned synchronous content as part of their learning journey that's planned in, which puts it slightly different to what's been discussed earlier today in some of the presentations yesterday. So the plan for this presentation is for me to walk you through what I've done in terms of my literature review of my PhD research, but I have promised that I will provide practical insights for people that people can review and take forward into their own work as well. But I'm going to start with the literature review process, look at high level in terms of education and sense of belonging, and then we'll get most of the presentation into those recommendations. Okay, so my literature review has used Healy and Healy's Scholarship of Teaching and Learning literature search framework because it really is a cyclical and dynamic process when looking at this literature. As has already been mentioned, there is very little literature out there specifically for this population of students. It's mainly, as already been discussed, it's mainly about during COVID or the switch to COVID or post-COVID. And this is a very unique student group that's growing with many institutions turning to having fully online delivery as part of their offering. So through the literature review, it's very quickly noticed and has been cited by others that keywords are not specific and standardised enough in this area. And also I should mention there's not obviously set databases for finding literature either. So it's very difficult and time consuming to go through all the databases to find the relevant literature. But also when keywords have been used, it tended to be very vague. At the time, it perhaps wasn't when the articles were written, but it would perhaps say online, but it doesn't necessarily determine whether it's fully asynchronous with some synchronous components, and it gets quite nuanced. So what I've done is I've identified about 500 papers and I've scoped those based on the criteria listed on the screen to really understand if it's focused on postgraduate students. Does it examine asynchronous programs without any face-to-face or limited synchronous components? Is it belonging, sense of belonging and retention? Because that's where my study is focusing on. And I'm looking at primary research or systematic reviews. And I'm looking at studies that have reviewed programs that are at least one full term in duration with a specific focus on block delivery, because that's what we do at Abertay. So in terms of the literature and education, online education is a form of distance education. The model on the screen is from Taylor, and that's just looking at it in terms of generations of distance education and online learning. And it's really that it's just a development of the way that technology has developed over time. It's part of this digital transformation agenda that's part of the fourth industrial revolution that we're going through and seeing remarkable pace of change at the moment with the advancements in AI, for example. So this encourages different types of pedagogical approaches in the delivery of things, but lots of them focus on active learning and the community of inquiry and their implementation of this type of online learning. So as I've already mentioned, there's asynchronous and synchronous. They're the two main ways to characterise online education, and they both have distinct characteristics and benefits. With real-time interactions that are available through that synchronous aspect, it's more easy to create that sense of belonging with those students. However, asynchronous provides greater flexibility for students and is a real positive for the widening access agenda. As we've already noted, there's quite a lot of students who are working full-time whilst undertaking study, and that perhaps was never really available to that student population before. So on the left of the screen, it's just really to note that sense of belonging is so important that my university even has won a Times Higher Education Award for putting the A to B, a place to belong campaign out there. So it's really important and noted as it being important to universities and students alike. There's three key ways or three key areas that sense of belonging is defined through. So psychology link this to physical and mental well-being. whereas sociology takes an interest in more the macrostructural level, so association with identity, citizenship, and community and place. However, in education, there's a consensus around a student's feeling connection to their institution. And the two most cited definitions that are used are Strayhorn or Goodenough's definition of belonging that are cited in the literature. However, there's no consistent definition that's used throughout. There are variations on each. The measures that exist for measuring sense of belonging are all different, and a lot of people don't often stick to the same one. They'll pick and choose with what they use from the instruments that are there. Most recently, Jamil in 2023 at the QAA conference in Scotland has developed a sense of belonging scale for online learning, and this is the first scale that's been published that's specific to the online learners. However, her full publication of her thesis hasn't happened yet, although she has got her PhD. So we're waiting on that being fully published to be able to get the full measure that has been developed to then apply it to understand its appropriateness of generalisability going forward. But what I would like to state here is that there is no agreed way to measure sense of belonging throughout the literature. And also in studies, many have used one definition and a measure that sort of contradicts that from its positioning. So that is one of my recommendations that I'll come to, is about making sure that the measure and the definition are linked within research, if that is your area as well. So on to the recommendations, which is really the key part of this presentation that I wanted to get across. And a lot of it's been touched on in presentation earlier today that's just been had, which is wonderful, but also in some of the presentations from yesterday too. So I'll share a note upon those points. So if you want to go and listen to those presentations that have been recorded, you can do so after the conference. So one of the key recommendations through the literature is around structured support systems for both academic and non-academic. So it's really recognising that it's not one person's responsibility, but the institution's responsibility to support our online students. But in doing so, we really need to make sure that there's staff training for all staff to make sure that they understand the online environment. I'm sure for many, the online is just one facet of what you're doing. And sometimes it can be difficult to ensure that all staff are aware of what that means for these students and how perhaps quick they need to respond because they're on a shorter module window for their study. Also allowing for facilitated peer networks to be developed and creating connections through structured activities and platforms. So this has been spoken about in presentations already. So there was a presentation from Nottingham yesterday from their psychology team, and this is something they touched upon as well, about students really desiring that faculty and peer recognition within their studies. So it's making sure that that's built into the online programmes, but also it's just been mentioned, like how do students do that independently? And they're obviously finding that as an important thing, but as was noted, they might feel left out, like reference to the group in London, and then somebody that's not in that group feeling a bit left out. So the literature suggests that individualised attention from academic staff does play a vital role in helping the students feel part of the community. One of the things that we do at Abertay is encourage that when feedback's given on assessments, that it can be given as a video or an audio file alongside a transcript to the student. So they're getting to hear or see, or both, their lecturer giving them that feedback to sort of promote that sense of community and belonging throughout their journey on their modules. Some of the things that can be used is also the use of real-time data to sort of personalise that support for students through different virtual learning environment tools that are out there. So this leads on to the second point about progress tracking tools. So similar, it'll be built into the virtual learning environment, but it's a way to allow the students to understand where they are in their learning journey. And it could also be combined with sort of a peer comparison dashboard for people to sort of gauge how they're doing in terms of progress through their modules. This is noted to increase student motivation, enhance their sense of belonging into that online community. What I would note here is it can be quite isolating for students that are online to understand where they are in the process and understand how long it's going to take them graduate, depending on the model that is used. So this is a really clear way, and almost has that gamification aspect of coming into that learning as well. Cultural integration was something that was sort of noted on in some of the presentations yesterday as well from the Open University about their postcards. So Mackenzie et al. Noted that the importance of incorporating cultural markers into learning activities around the context with regional identities. And this can help with cultural background feeling like it's being recognised and valued by the institution. And something that we've done, we've got an orientation module that's open to all of our students throughout their online journey. But as part of the initial welcome, we get students to pin on a map where they are in the world. And in their introduction and welcome to everybody, we ask them to share a little bit about themselves. And what I find most interesting is the interaction really picks up at times where things like the Olympics are on and people are noting their praise and their admiration for their athletes from their countries or another country and how well they've done in particular events. So just really interesting things to be aware of, what's going on in the world that people can relate to at those times as well. So the student voice is a huge part, and is part of my question for the last team in the presentation about having a mechanism by which our online students can feed back to the institution at any time in a way that's convenient to them, to allow the institutions to learn from the student population that's so under-researched. And that allows the university to respond in a relevant way to them and understanding where they're coming from and their needs. So one of the things that Abertay are doing, we're piloting a digital tool for our student experience and student representation, because we noted that the on-campus traditional model, it just isn't working for our online students, particularly because of the time zones, people having full-time jobs and not being able to attend at certain times when those meetings were scheduled, but also their inability to perhaps liaise with all the students that are on their programme to understand what is really affecting them and what could be done to support them. So now we have this open forum that is close to the students, and there's a student moderator that will escalate up anything that they would like to raise with Abertay. So online orientation resources are a huge part of what's important to our students, having one place to go for everything that they need. And it's what we are trying to improve at Abertay just now through some action research projects. But this is really the place that can help students navigate their online learning environment and feel more connected, particularly in areas to support building the online environment and building confidence with the digital tools that may influence the student's ability to engage and develop a sense of belonging. So that's already been noted earlier, but it's that thing of you only know what you know. And it's partly something that I'm really interested in delving deeper into, because some of the literature suggests that digital divide is what's really stopping students from persisting through their degree. They'll maybe give up at their first module because they found that interaction too challenging or difficult or knowing what to do. I'm hoping that through my interviews I will analyse these in terms of the social materiality of how lecturers and academics intend the content to be used online and the way that students interact with that, because the online space is that campus for these students, and I want to understand ways in which that all links together to create that experience for these students, and how that could be better understood by both academic and students. Like, you know, there's multiple ways that you on a website that you can get to the same location, and sometimes it's just you know what you know and you know the buttons you like to press and where you're drawn to do that. What's also been quite interesting is we don't have at Abertay, we don't have any synchronous planned content within the modules for our students, but qualification-wide events comes up in the literature as being important to create that sense of belonging with their online students. But what's been noted through most of the presentations on this area at this conference is that, yes, the students are asking for these, but yeah, low participation, but also the way that these are communicated to the students is very important, because if you send everything to your online students, including on-campus events, which they are unlikely to be able to attend, it can then create greater isolation and a greater barrier between the students and the institution. But it is really a great way to do it if you have something specific that you want to market to these students that are online that's perhaps related to their course content, or some of their modules that it would be really relevant to and could use as a case study, it's a great way to get those students involved. However, time zones are always the most complained about thing for most of our students. So having these recorded is a good way that these students don't miss out. The final 2 points are back to the research points. So if you are a researcher in this area, it's just really understanding the keywords that are to be used, as I'm sure we all are, but just understanding where that literature is at, and perhaps we can come to some agreement on what those keywords should be going forward. And then again, just mentioning the difference in the definition and measure of sense of belonging in literature. So just to be sure that the definition and measure used align with their definition and meaning of these things. So this is the end of my presentation. There's a list of references there. But I guess my research is going to be a mixed method study into how sense of belonging impacts upon the retention of our online postgraduate students that are in a block delivery that is mainly asynchronous content. So that's my presentation. I really welcome any comments or questions that you may have.